Now then, Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome back to Journey with Arrows. If you're new, thanks for joining. If you've already been subscribed and following for a while, then thank you for coming back. Today we are going to do a tutorial on how to shoot thumb release with Asiatic bows or horse bows, if you like. I'm going to call them Asiatic bows because that's what they are. It's thumb release, the traditional way of shooting these bows. So yeah, we're going to dig into that today. Now, this, just to put it out there, I'm not a professional. By all means, definitely not a professional. And there are a lot of different types of thumb release archery out there, lots of different styles, cultures of which have their own take, and methods in which they shoot. Kudo, Gao Ying, Manchu, just to name a few. They're all very different, but all, at the end of the day, do the same thing with slight variations. So we're going to dive into things from body posture, foot placement, hand placement, how to draw the bow, how to aim the bow. I say aim, I use that word loosely, and obviously at the end of the day it's all down to further research and practice, getting out there and doing it. But I'm going to see if I can give you guys some tips and some pointers. So if you haven't shot thumb release archery before and you fancy giving it a go, then hopefully you can take something away from this video and you can learn how to do it. Now, as I said, there's lots of different types of thumb ring archery or thumb release aids, if you like. I'm going to say aid. I wouldn't really call it an aid. I mean, a thumb ring is probably something that's more needed to protect your thumb from nerve damage and injury. I certainly would not say it aids you in being able to shoot better in any shape, meaning, or form. Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, I was interested in competing in some of the target face competitions for like theatre, and they said that if I was to shoot my Asiatic bow on thumb release, then I would have to go into the compound category, because apparently having a thumb ring like this is considered a release aid, and because it's not made from a natural material, that particular one's brass, I would have to be lumped in with compound shooters. How the hell you can compare a compound shooter with a traditional Asiatic bow shooter, I don't know, but anyway, it's another story. So yes, there's different types of thumb ring. I do not have them all here. I just have a few examples. This is one that I use. I'll put pictures of these up after. This is the Victory ring by Vermeil Archery. It's made from brass. It's a good ring. It's a really good ring. The ring is probably the most important thing that you're going to need, obviously besides the bow and the arrow. Without a good thumb ring and without a good fitting thumb ring, you're really going to struggle to do thumb release. I've been in situations before now where I've had thumb rings that are too big. I've had my thumb packed out with electrical tape, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And obviously a thumb ring that's too small is, well, neither use nor ornament, is it, really? So there's that one. There is also the aluminum plastic. So if you're just starting out, I started out with plastic ones. They're cheaper, obviously. I would probably say it's a good idea to maybe get a few plastic ones of a few different sizes if you're not sure on what size you are, because A, they're cheaper, B, you can kind of get used to getting a feel for a thumb ring before going on to a brass one. Alternatively, you might want to go straight for a brass one, but just make sure you get your sizing right. They're also made from horn. That's a horn one. They come in lots of different variations. And we've got antlers, and we've got this looks a little bit like a curtain ring. These are Manchu rings, so this is a plastic one. And traditionally, they were made from moose antler, horn, all that kind of thing. Sometimes they were made from jade. We've got one in my local museum over here made from jade, and it's stunning. And the way that they use these is different to how they use like a normal thumb ring. So we'll give you a sight as to how they're used, and yeah, we'll crack on with this tutorial. So a thumb ring is obviously worn on the thumb, like so, and it provides a a protective pad against your thumb pad, obviously, which is where the string sits, just behind the back of the thumb ring here. So it's important that you get one that fits and that there isn't a gap between it, and it's not going to be spinning, that it sits nice and snug into there. Now, the way that this works with the bowstring and with an arrow is like so. Let me grab my bow. So you have to bear with me, guys, because I'm still right behind the camera here. In traditional thumb ring archery, the arrow is placed on the right side to begin with. So that's your first difference. We're not shooting, how we do in the Western world, on this left-hand side of the bow. So the arrow's on the right. Now, there is a few reasons for this, and we'll go into that in a moment. So when your arrow's knocked in place, your thumb ring is actually sitting underneath the arrow here. So it sits just behind the back. Some of them have a little groove here where the string will actually sit in. This one doesn't. So the thumb ring is going to sit on like so, and it's going to slide up to the knocking point on your arrow. Now your index finger comes over the top of your thumbnail here. So the knuckle from your index finger is actually touching your arrow. So your thumb is what's pulling the weight of the bow. Your index finger is locking it in place like a trigger. So this is how we shoot. This is how we draw, and this is how we move around with the arrow loaded. Now there's a few reasons for this, and there's a few, depending on the way that the thumb ring's made, the type of thumb ring, this angle between hooking changes. With the Manchu rings, they're a little bit more open like so. The thumb rings are also a little bit further down over the knuckle, so it'll be more this kind of angle. With this angle, I prefer a little bit more of a harsher grip on there. It works for me. That's going to be down to personal preference and the type of thumb ring that you have. Now, I shall show you why we have the arrow, or a couple of the benefits as to why we have the arrow on this side of the bow. And for that, I need to be in front of the camera. So traditionally, thumb ring archery is probably adopted over more countries on the planet than actually the three-fingered Western way of shooting is. Now, obviously nowadays it seems to be the other side is a lot more prevalent and a lot more commonly used. Thumb ring is still done traditionally in cultures as part of their heritage, and it's practiced obviously by people like us, and it seems to be becoming a little bit more well known and practiced nowadays in comparison. So why do we have the arrow on that side of the bow? Traditionally, you would probably find that these were all shot on horseback, hence why they get mislabeled as being a horse bow. Cultures such as the Mongolians, the Chinese, the Japanese, all pretty much founded their whole system and way of life from horseback. So like their warfare was done on horseback. The cultures were known for that, especially things like the samurai. They were horseback archers before they were people with swords. So when you're on a horse, obviously you have your horse's head in between your legs, and you're bouncing up and down, and you're trying to loose off arrows. Now, it is possible, in the case of things like longbowmen over here in England, to shoot a longbow with the arrow on the left-hand side of the bow, pulling with three fingers. However, it takes a lot more practice, and as you're running and you're bouncing, and your arrow is drawn here, your arrow is bouncing all over the place, and you're really going to struggle to keep that shot straight, or even to get a good clean release. You may well have found that they may have even put an index finger over the arrow just to hold it in place until the such point as they were releasing it. That's probably up for debate. Obviously, the English long bows or the war bows are very high poundage draws. Their draw weights in excess of 100, and I would think personally that you would probably struggle to shoot something that length from the back of a horse. So I wouldn't be surprised if the war bows, or the long bows if you like, would have probably been of a lower poundage on horseback. Might not have been. There might have been some brutes out there that might have been able to pull it off. But for the case of this topic, the reason why we have the arrows on the thumb side is because that grip with the thumb and the knuckle actually stops the arrow from bouncing. It's also quicker when you're on the move to be taking an arrow, putting it onto the right side and knocking it and being there already ready to go, rather than having to either A, thread it through and put it in, or bring it over the top, which obviously when you're bringing them over the top, you have to make sure you're not going to be clunking your horse in order to get that in and to draw. So speed is a benefit. It's quicker to be up here and to be clipped in without even looking, and it offers so much more stability when you have your thumb ring tucked up underneath and your knuckle in on the side. When you're here on your horse, whatever position you're shooting from, when you're at full draw, it doesn't matter how much movement you give it, the arrow's not moving anywhere. It's absolutely solid. Even if I jump, there's no movement, the arrow is not coming off. Your knuckle acts as a pivot point, if you like, or an anchor point to keep the arrow in place for where it needs to be. That's probably one of the main reasons why we shoot that way, especially when it comes from the lineage of archery on horseback, and why it's still practiced today as well. Now, it does have its pros, it has its cons, as does shooting on the other side. So we'll go into a few of those. And yeah, I don't think it's really a case of one's better than the other. They're two very different styles, two very different systems of shooting, and both of them take just as much practice as each other, and both of them have just as much depth and practice that's going to be needed to actually execute a shot perfectly as well. So we'll go through a couple of pros and cons of both sides. So we've come down to the target face, guys, just to give you a point of reference rather than trees and leaves. Now, as you can see, these bows are not what we refer to as being center shot bows. Traditional bows that do not have a shelf are not center shot. Modern bows nowadays, whether they be recurve or compound, or the more traditionally made modern recurves, if you like, full piece hunters, that kind of thing, whatever you want to call them, that they have an arrow shelf, and they are a center shot bow, meaning that the arrow lies more in line with the top and the bottom limb than it does being set off center. As you can see in the first picture, the arrow sitting over the thumb obviously scoots the arrow out to the right hand side. Now, you're going to have the same issue with this with an arrow on the left hand side, as you can see in the second picture now, which means that if we were to just point the bow directly at the target and not the arrow, then your arrow is going to deviate off to either the right or the left, depending as to what side of the bow hand you're shooting from. So for the case of this video, if you have your arrow over the thumb side, which it should be if you're doing a thumb ring archery, and you point the bow at the target, now unless you have a very weakly spined arrow, in theory, dependent as to the distance as well, obviously, your arrow is going to scoot off to the right hand side. So there are a few reasons why this happens. Obviously, the bow is in the way, which is the main reason. But you do also have this issue on the left-hand side of the bow as well when they're shooting with three fingers. As an example, when you shoot with three fingers, the string is generally gripped with two fingers below and one finger above. Now, when this is drawn, you're actually putting a roll on this string. You're actually rolling the string at the point of release. Now, what this does, as the arrow flies, the arrow bends, which is going to be the case with any arrow that's shot. So as this passes through the air, like this, the arrow warps, it flexes and it bends like so. It's going to go all the way through, like this. Now, this is called the archer's paradox, and the way we get around this shooting three fingers on the left-hand side is to have an appropriately tuned arrow. We refer to it as being the spine, which refers to the flex of this arrow. Now, there are things that come into play with this, such as the arrow's length and the arrow's weight will all affect how much this arrow flexes in the air. If you have quite a long arrow and a heavy arrowhead, this arrow is going to flex quite a lot. If it's short, then it's not going to flex as much. So things like draw length, draw weight, arrow weights, and this spine, the flex of the arrow, all come into play. So it gets quite mathematical in this sense, in trying to figure out what arrow is going to be bestly suited to shoot from the bow that you're shooting from and how you're shooting it. Now, when you shoot with 3 fingers and you release and you roll that string, it kicks this arrow out to the right. So if I stand this way, on point of release from here, if we were shooting 3 fingers, the string rolls, it kicks the arrow out this way. So it comes out, it flexes, and it actually bends around the riser. It bends around the handle of the bow. So by the time it's already about here on the arrow, it's warped itself around the bow handle to reach its target. Now that's where the practice comes in regards to actually being able to hit the target with a longbow or a bow that does not have a shelf. When we shoot thumb release, we drastically reduce the amount of paradox that is on the arrow. Because we are pulling with our thumb and our knuckle is what's holding the arrow in place, this motion here is a lot cleaner and a lot quicker than releasing with 3 fingers, when we are having very little influence on that string, as you can see. Even when I hold this here, I'm not really even holding that string. I apologise if that's blurry for you guys. So when we release at full draw and we come and we cast away, this string does not move left to right as it's going forwards. It might do a little bit in fairness, but for the most part, it is going directly straight in the same direction in which it was drawn. So that has less effect on the arrow in regards to it being kicked out. So the flex on the arrow is far less, and it actually slightly begins in the opposite way as well. Now this obviously can be an issue, because again, if your arrow is not tuned to your bow, if you have an arrow that's too stiff, then, and if you don't compensate with the bow hand movement, then your arrow is going to skate off to the right, which is probably what you're going to find if you're just starting out doing thumb release archery, as did I. It takes a little bit of practice to get your head around that and the sight picture that you're going to be seeing when you're looking down the arrow, or not looking down the arrow, should I say. It's probably going to throw you out, especially if you've been shooting on the left-hand side of the bow prior to trying thumb ring archery. So when we release, the arrow passes through. There is already a reduced movement in this arrow, so in theory the arrow flies truer, maybe a little bit quicker as well, and obviously the shape of the bow is going to compensate for the arrow's speed, as is the arrow's weight. But it does mean, and it's not always the case, but it does mean that generally there has to be some give or some movement in the bow hand to compensate for this arrow to pass. Now, it's not always the case. You could draw and you could start, or you could kind of aim to go along the method of having the bow off center like so already. So your arrow is already aiming where it needs to be, and by the time you collapse, there's already a slight movement that's coming off there as well. Now, other cultures or other methods of shooting have what's called katra or hatra, which, let me move this camera back so I've got some room to stand here. Hatra just refers to the movement of the bow on release of the arrow. So as we draw and as we release, there has to be some form of movement that allows the arrow to pass the riser of the handle. Different cultures have many different ways of doing this. Some of them are very, very dramatic, and some of them are ever so minimal as well. Personally, I find that having a minimal hatra helps more than having a big flamboyant movement at the end. It's very much down to the person's own interpretation and what they feel is more comfortable and how they like to do it. You will see with archers that practice things like Kyudo and the Japanese archery, they will be sat here shooting, and on release the bow spins this way. That's a moment of hatra that moves that out the way. It also, in theory, produces a little bit more speed on the arrow as it's coming through, as does any hatcher that most people that are practicing hatcher will tell you. Now, there are different types. You can have one where when you're here and you're drawing, at the point of release, because you're squeezing your shoulder blades together, both the bow arm and the draw arm collapse out of the way, which is how I prefer to do it. So when we're here and we drop and we release, that movement in itself here is what creates that catcher to allow the arrow to pass. Others will have one where they shoot and it comes down this way. They'll have ones that go that way. I've seen all sorts. I've seen ones that come up here and ones that come down there. So each to their own on that. But within theory, a little bit of movement on the bow hand helps that bow pass as well. In the same breath, some people prefer to have no hatcher and just keep it there and keep it solid, which obviously your sight picture and the way that you're patterning yourself to take the shot, you're going to get used to over practice as well. So there's quite a few different variations on that, and it's just finding something that works well for yourself. So I'll give you a demonstration, and then we'll kind of break it down and we'll go into the draw and kind of go into a little bit about sight picture and aiming as well. Now, there isn't actually any particular point of aim, I would say. The reason being, again, another comparison between shooting on the left side and shooting on the right side is as follows. When you have an arrow on the left-hand side of the bow, this is where the tricky bit comes. When you have an arrow on the left-hand side of the bow and you're drawing, if you imagine we're already at full draw here and you're looking behind the archer, you can see down that arrow. So you've got a nice clear line of sight between the arrow and the target. So you know roughly where your arrow is going to be going and where you want it to go, whether that be straight there or slightly canted, each to their own. So that's probably the most major benefit of being able to shoot on the left hand side of the bow, is that you can see on your arrow. You can place your arrowhead wherever it needs to be, dependent on the trajectory and the distance between you and your target. Now, on the right hand side of the bow, of the arrow, you can't do that. As you can see there, the bow handle is in the way of the arrow. At full draw, you can't really see, and you can't come around this side of the bow. You can't tilt your head on the opposite side of the string in order to see where your arrow is going. So this becomes totally down to feel. It becomes down to instinct, or intuition, should I say, rather than instinct, and down to practice. Now, you can look down this part of the arrow when you're at full draw, or should I say this part here, which is what I do sometimes over longer distance shots. If I'm drawn, I can look down the part of the arrow that I can see. I can't see my arrowhead, but I can look down the part of the arrow that I can see that's there, in order to get a rough idea of the direction in which my arrow is going to be going and the trajectory that it needs to be at. But in all honesty, beyond that, anything just becomes guesswork. And that just comes down to practice, and for the use of a better term, feeling the shot. When you've done it often enough and you practice it often enough, this just becomes second nature. It's not really something that you can say, look here, take this as a point of aim. Certainly not for me. It is just feel and practice. So we'll give you a demonstration, we'll show you what it looks like, and then we'll break it down for you guys. So we've come down to probably I think it's probably the longest shot on the course that's here today. I've got the whole place to myself, there's nobody here. The target face that you've just been looking at, that we've just used to demonstrate on it, is at the bottom down there, on the boss, on the target face, and our peg where I'm going to be shooting from is from here. So you'll see me take a shot, all being well, we'll hit it. And one thing you'll probably notice is the difference between, apart from the obvious differences that we've already spoken about, is the way in which the shot process happens in relation to an archer that might be doing, say, the Olympic recurve archery. There's no anchor points underneath the chin and on the nose or on the lips, or whatever you want to refer to. And I'd say the shots are taken quicker. that's not generally something that's a hard, fast rule. I think that's just down to the archer, to be honest with you. But anyway, we'll take the shot and then we'll go through a few steps and explain it to you. Just a little bit low. That one. Second one down. I'll give you a breakdown for you guys. So one thing I would highly recommend for anybody starting any type of archery, whether it be thumb ring or traditional 3-finger archery, would be to not try and think that it's a good idea to practice archery over a long distance if you've never shot an arrow before. I would highly recommend standing maybe 6 feet away from the target and just starting from there, as we'll explain in a moment. So first shot, he's actually off the target on the bottom left. Second shot that you've just seen, slap bang in the gold. So guys, let's break down the shot process and go into things like body posture and things. So then guys, let's break down the shot process and start from the bottom up. So your feet, believe it or not, are actually quite an important element to consider in shooting in regards to the direction of the target. Now, it's good practice to be able to shoot from any position within reason, if you're not just doing formal target archery where you've got both feet shoulder width apart and you're stood parallel to the target. It's good to be able to mix up feet position, especially on a course like this, and this is what's referred to as an NFAS course. So it is different targets of varying lengths. Usually they're 3D animals in the woods and things, and you could be shooting from any position, anywhere, through trees, kneeling down, leaning backwards, leaning forwards, you name it. But anyway, we're not going to get into that. So foot position and the angle in which you have your feet has quite a lot to play when it comes to the top half of your body in regards to shooting. Now, I'm going to explain why this is, and then we'll put you on the tripod and we'll explain it to you then. So, standard shoulder width apart. It's a good stance to have. You've got both feet in line, and they're in line with your target that you're going to be aiming at. Now, when you have both feet in line, the distance in which when you draw your bow is going to be sufficient enough to be able to take a decent shot, which is the reason why obviously they stand like this in the Olympics. It is quite a basic stance. And yeah, it works. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. I use it. A lot of archers do. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because if I place my right foot forwards, I'm a right-handed archer. So if I place my right hand forwards, so my right foot forwards, and my left foot just a little bit further back. Now, there's nothing wrong with shooting like this if you've had practice with it, but now my chest is more in line with that target face rather than my left shoulder. So let me put you on a tripod. I might be able to explain this a little bit better for you. Okay, let me come around the front side of this target again. You'll be able to see what I'm meaning then. So I currently have both feet in line with my shoulders top to bottom. This places my left shoulder in line with the target, and at full draw my right shoulder in line with the target. So when I'm here and I'm waiting to set my shot, everything is perfectly lined up on that horizontal axis facing the target. Now if I place my right foot forwards and bring my left foot back a little bit, You see how my posture's changed? I now have my chest more in line with the target, which means if I just draw to here, my draw length has been cut, it's shortened, because I do not have the expansion unless I twist my hips to get that extra draw length. Which there's nothing wrong with doing that. You just have to make sure that you're going to twist your hips into that shot. This is what we call a closed stance, where you're closing the distance between yourself and your ability to make a full draw. On the flip side, if I place my left foot a little bit further forwards and bring my right foot back, I'm turning my left shoulder slightly away from the target, which is not enough to mean that I'm shooting over my shoulder, but it is enough that it allows me to get some extra rotation and extra draw length on that target. If I demonstrate for you. So, with 2 feet together, my shoulders in line with the target. We come here. We make the full draw. And everything's in line. Now, if I place my right foot forwards and my left foot back slightly, we've cut the draw length, which means it's more of an effort for me to be able to squeeze through without twisting my hips to get to the full draw. You can feel it. Here is like roughly where I need it to be, onto there. If I place my left foot forwards just a little bit further forwards and my right foot back, creating distance here, I'm giving myself more room to expand onto a further draw length. Into here. Okay? So that's the most important thing. To begin with, start with 2 feet together. Make sure you're not stood at an opaque angle, if you like, or an acute angle. And just get a nice sturdy stance, both feet shoulder width apart, and keep everything in line with the target to begin with. Okay. Now we'll put you back on the cradle, and you can see it from the side then, and we'll explain a little bit more in regards as to how it's shot. So, we've got shoulder width apart on his feet. We've got hips in line with our shoulders. We're not going to go into overextending for a long shot. But just to keep it simple for you guys, just starting out, working up. It's good to have a good stance. You don't want to be rigid. You don't want to have your knees locked out. You don't want your back totally straight and locked up under here either. We have what's called the 3 bows. And it's the bow itself. We have the bow from the top side, which is the shape from the shoulders across, and we have the bow within the structure of the actual archer themselves. Now, you've probably noticed on the couple of shots that I've taken so far that when I shoot, I have a little bit of a lean to lean forwards with. Now, there is a reason for that. The reason being is that a lot of modern day archers you'll see that will shoot on the left hand side will have a very straight posture. They'll be here, they'll line up, and they'll place the chin and the nose and the lip on the target, which there's nothing wrong with that. I find, and a lot of archers find as well, and it's fairly well documented in scriptures and in history as well, is that with heavier draw weights of bow, certainly for military and for warfare use, you really need to engage those shoulder muscles to pull the bow. It's a very important point actually, which probably should have been made earlier. We do not draw a bow with our biceps. It's not a wrestling game. Everything is done with squeezing the shoulders together. Now, with a heavier draw weight bow, you need to be able to utilize your whole body to draw that draw weight. And for me personally, if it was good enough for them with a higher draw weight, why not do it even with a lower draw weight? This is a fairly low draw weight bow. This is only 40 pounds at 33 inches. They do have heavier draw weight bows, but I shoot them all the same. So I find it a lot easier, and to actually be able to get that 30 It's a little bit of wind here, guys. Let me see if I can peg you down a little bit harder. There we go. So I actually find that to get that third bow, or the bow in the Archer, it helps to actually be able to lean into the shot. So not only are you actually able to squeeze your shoulders together and to create the form that's needed, but you're part of the shot. It's like being on a motorbike and leaning into it and actually kind of getting in and becoming part of the machine. It's the same with the bow. When you hear it's a weapon, you're leaning into it to take that shot. Like with a rifle. Your rifle's butted, you're leaning in to take the shot. Everything is nice and secure. It's the same within archery. It's a weapon. As much as people don't like to acknowledge the fact that it is a weapon. So that helps. On that note, having a good strong bow arm to be able to brace that bow is obviously needed as well, and to try and prevent the motion of your arm dropping on release. Now you're going to get some bow arm movement. There are very few people that I know of that can actually keep a rock solid steady bow arm unless they're shooting a very low poundage bow for their build and their physique and their weight. If I picked up a 15-pound bow, I could probably shoot that and keep my hands there all day and it wouldn't be an issue. But when you start shooting higher draw weights of bow, you're going to get a little bit of motion, and that's where the practice comes in. And we're all learning every day on that. So, once you get your feet planted, your hips planted, you've got a nice, good, strong bow arm that's in there as well. Obviously, we've discussed as to how the thumb ring links in underneath the arrow here, and your index finger comes over the top. This is probably something as a thumb ring archer, when you're beginning, you're going to struggle with, and it's getting used to that release. Now, the release shouldn't be a deliberate let go, because when we draw the bow, you want to be drawing and drawing and drawing to a point where you're trying to draw beyond the bow. You're pulling through the string, if you like. At that point, the string slips away. That's going to give you a clean release. Now, every one of us practices that, and every one of us mucks it up at some point. So, even I muck it up, everybody mucks it up, you're going to muck it up, so don't worry about it. The last thing you want is to come here and stop, and then make a deliberate, conscious effort to release. You don't really want to do that. You might find you get it in the gold, it might work, but it's not the correct way of doing it. You want to be pulling through to a point where it collapses and it moves away. It's like throwing a ball as well. This you probably will have also seen when I shoot, I have a collapse and my arm comes back. That's not actually a conscious effort for me to do that. That just happens. And that is like throwing a ball or a stick. If I throw a ball and let go at the apex of where it is I'm going to be throwing, my arm's going to carry on going through, because that is the motion of throwing a ball. You don't throw a ball and stop there like a catapult or goes through. For me, it's the same with the archery. I'm coming through, I take the shot and it's gone. And that's what it is. You'll see a lot of archers that will come through and they'll drop and it will collapse. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Just for me, that comes naturally, and it's more of a conscious effort for me to be able to just drop everything down, which is the difference that you'll see between traditional recurve archers nowadays shooting on whatever side, generally the left hand side. Everything will be lined and they'll drop here. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. So the style of, I say the style loosely, but the style of archery in which I take a lot of readings from is a Chinese style called Gaoying. And to begin with, they adopt quite a high starting point. The reason for this is that it already locates the shoulder set down. You don't want to have a high shoulder. If you have a high shoulder and you're hunched here, your posture's out and you're going to cause yourself injury. You might not hurt yourself for the first 1, 2, 10, 100 shots, but over time you're going to cause strain on your body and you're going to hurt yourself. So starting with a high posture here, this shoulder is already set down. This bow arm wants to be down. What it also encourages is when you're up here, is to use your lats and your back to actually draw the bow over, and you come down and you can settle into the point where your shoulders are squeezed together. Modern day archers, you'll see, will just start horizontal, and everything is done on the horizontal plane here. Now I find that that's more effort to get from here to here on a horizontal plane than it is to get from having a low set shoulder to leaning into it here. I find that a lot more comfortable and a lot more efficient, which is the reason why I use it. Now, some gowing archers will have that little collapse at the end, others will just have it where it drops down here. Each to their own on that one. I do believe the correct way is actually just to drop down here, but whatever happens beyond that is down to the personal archer's, I won't say preference, but whatever comes naturally. So we have feet in line, shoulder dipped. In regards to the grip on the bow, I find that my ring finger and my little finger are the ones that are going to be placing more of the grip on the bow. My middle, my index and my thumb. My thumb overlaps my index. My middle finger's just there for a bit of support. So I'm not squeezing it like I would do whatever you want to squeeze. But the grip is with the bottom fingers. It's keeping it tight into there as well. Obviously, you don't want a really loose grip, like what you see with a lot of modern day archers. They will also have a sling, so they barely even grip it. This is quite a big difference in the grips of the bow. Is that a modern recurve archer or even compound archer will hold the bow usually like this, on almost like a 45-degree angle, with these knuckles coming out. They have very little contact with the riser, so when they're here and they take the shot, the bow rolls. Everything is just excess momentum, kinetic energy that's dispersed through. They don't want to have any influence on that bow. We can't do that because we'll drop the bow. Obviously, we don't have bow slings, we don't have an arrow shelf. So I find, for me, these bottom two fingers keeps a nice tight grip into the bottom part of that bow. My thumb locks over top of my index finger, and this is what creates my arrow shelf, where my arrow is going to be sat. So we've got a low bow arm. The other thing I like to do personally as well is this arm is never locked out straight. This arm is never locked out straight. In the same way you would throw a punch, you wouldn't throw a punch and lock your arm out, because if you miss the guy, you're going to injure yourself. So as you throw a punch, you want to create just a little bit of a flex in your arm, where if you do miss, you've not overextended, you've not hurt yourself. Kinetic energy has a little bit of give in somewhere to go. So I find that that's quite important in not having a locked out arm as well. Now, we still have anchor points, albeit some of them are quite long draws. I have another bow at home which draws up to 37 inches, which is well beyond the back of my ear. We still have anchor points. They're not on the string. The anchor point will be on the arrow, whether it's a fletching or a knot, but it still sits on the side of the cheek or the lip or the eye, wherever you find comfortable on your face, where you like to aim, is going to be your anchor point, to the point of you drawing back and having some reference point as to where you need to be sitting to take the shot for consistency. Now that might vary between bows and it might vary between arrows as well, but it still applies. So when you're here, you've got your shoulder dipped, you got a little bit of flex in your arm, you got your legs in line to the target, the bow's high, and the shoulders are drawing back to here. So when you're here, and you're coming up and you're coming over, you might get a little bit of a canter on the bow. I would advise to begin with trying to keep the bow straight. Try and keep your bow straight, keep everything aligned here. The bow arm is quite important as well. You don't want chicken wing elbows. You see, certainly on the left hand side when people shoot, when they draw here, they have an elbow that sticks up like this. you want to try and keep everything in line coming all the way through. You should be able to take a picture of yourself and take a line from the tip of your arrow and draw it all the way through to the back of your elbow. It should be in line. That's what you want to try and aim for. And if you do have a release at the end, trying to keep that consistent within the line of that shot that you're trying to place onto the target. Like so. I think the most important thing to remember is to make sure that you get a thumb ring that fits you well. If you want to go straight in for metal ones or anything, it's worthwhile putting a little bit of money into a good ring to make sure that you're going to get one that's going to A, last you, and B, one that's going to do the job that it's intended to do. As I said, you could always start with a plastic one. I did do prior to getting a metal one, just to make sure that the sizes were going to be okay and that you can actually get used to practicing with a thumb ring. Now, you can try it without a thumb ring, but you're not going to get very far up in regards to the poundage of the bows, unless you fancy a really calloused and maybe even a deformed thumb by the end of it. You're going to do yourself some damage. There's a reason why there is historical references and even historical rings around in museums and things. It's because they had them for a reason. Yeah. And a lot of the times as well, they were in some cultures a show of wealth as to how well made or how well decorated your thumb ring was. There's some amazing ones out there. So get a good thumb ring that fits well. The release is something that you're going to be practicing for your entire hobby of shooting thumb release. You're going to have shots that are bad, you're going to have shots that are amazing, you're going to have shots that are so good you think I'm never going to be able to do that again, and hope that you can. We all mess up on getting clean releases. That's just part of the parcel of it, as you will do when you shoot with 3 fingers. Everybody's going to get a rubbish release at some point, unless you're using a release aid like you would do with a compound. I think the chances of you having a perfect release every single time is probably going to be reasonably slim. But it's practice, and that's what it's all about. So, yeah, make sure you get a good thumb ring. And obviously, it goes without saying, if you're practicing archery, either make sure that you're either on your own land that is well away from public footpaths and vehicles or whatever, health and safety. It is a projectile weapon. You don't want to be impaling anybody or anything other than the target. Obviously, you don't be pointing it at people and things as well. So there's quite a lot that goes into it. There is a brilliant book called The Way of Archery, which I'll put the link in the video as well. The Way of Archery, and it is a brilliant book. It's a really good book. It goes into some really quite deep depth on shooting, and it can give you a lot more coverage than what I have in this video. But I hope you guys have had the ability to take something away from this today. I've probably rambled on just a little bit as well. I've never done a tutorial before, so if it's rubbish, let me know. Put a dislike, thumbs up on the or thumbs down on the video. If you have liked it, give us a thumbs up and leave your feedback, because I'd like to do more videos like this, and if you guys want to see anything, then I'm happy to do it as well. So give us a heads up. I spent most of the day out here today filming this, and I may yet put a few other bits in, so we'll see. But for now, guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If I think of anything else I can bring to the table to enlighten you on, and I'll just do another video and we'll pop it up as well. So thanks for watching. I hope you can take something from this video. Stay safe, shoot well. Thank you.